So what do you see when you look in the mirror? We're still working our way through that concept. What is it that the Bible tells us that when we look in the mirror and we see ourselves, not just physically, but spiritually, what are some things that we should see? And this morning we're going to be taking a look at 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, and we're pulling some phrases out. And I know that we're doing that, but we're going to be taking out verse 5, and I want us to hear a phrase there. Last night, I don't know, it was about, I guess it was about 9 o'clock or so. My dog, CJ, which is a mix of a collie, Labrador. He's not a real bright dog. Let me just put it that way. He's a dog. And about 9 o'clock every night, it's the same pattern. He comes over and he puts his head in my lap. I rub his ears for a little bit, and then I say, do you need to go outside? And he runs to the door. It's the pattern. We do it every night about 9 o'clock. Every night about 9 o'clock. But he knows he gets a bone if he does that. So at 9:15 he does it, and at 9:30 he does it, until we go to bed. He kind of has got in that habit of wanting to go outside. But last night at 9 o'clock, I walked to the door, opened it up, and stepped out on the deck. And I normally, when he goes out in the yard, I step out on the deck and put my arms up on the railing and watch him as he does his business, and then he comes back in. But last night, instead of running off the deck, he went, "Arr!" And so I decided I better turn on the light. And so I reached back and I flipped on the light, and right where I normally stand was this big possum. And I would have probably hugged that possum had CJ not growled to tell me there was something in the dark. Okay, something in the dark. There's a difference when we turn on the lights. One of the things that I want us to hear today is that walking in the light does not necessarily mean that I am so glorious and I am so important to God that He follows me everywhere I go. He's got a spotlight on me, and no matter where I go, the light is on for me. So if I decide to go out in the nighttime, I have this spotlight on me so everybody can see me and I can see where I'm going. No, that's not walking in the light. Walking in the light has become an attitude for us. It represents one of the greatest divides in the Bible for us. Listen to what Paul says in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. And let me remind you that 1 Thessalonians may very well have been one of the very first letters that Paul wrote, if not the first letter that Paul wrote. And he says this to us: you are all sons of light and sons of day. We are not night nor of darkness. Okay? And it's a this or that. We picked up a little bit more on that when we discovered in the Dead Sea Scrolls that the Dead Sea Scrolls made a lot of references to the sons of light and to the sons of darkness. And we begin to understand that maybe even Jesus picked up on that concept of a little bit when he talked about, I am the light of the world. If any man comes to me, they come to the light. I'm the light of the world. Okay? He also would say, I didn't come into the world to judge the world, John chapter 3, verse 17, but I came into the world that they might be saved. But men loved darkness rather than light. Okay, so this idea of living in light or walking in the light is not so much walking in the daylight or always having some kind of light on us. I grew up hearing something like this: good people do not do things after dark. You're not supposed to be, there's just not a good place where you should be at 12 o'clock at night. Well, that was just my mom's way of making sure that I got home before that time when I chose to obey that. Sometimes I'd stay out longer, and sometimes I would come in, and sometimes, most of the time, I was not in a really bad situation. I was in a place where safe, sound, it was fun, and I was at a party somewhere where nothing was going on. We weren't doing bad things. So we got to be very, very cautious how we draw this line between what is dark and what is light, and what is day and what is night. Okay? Paul wants us to understand that there's a difference whether the lights are on or the lights aren't on. It's an internal light. It's an eternal attitude that we choose. And we do make a choice. Either we're going to be sons of light or we're going to be sons of darkness. And by the way, everyone will make that choice. Now, I want you to understand that. It's important that you understand that. Everyone will make that choice. You will either choose to be sons of light, and Paul says, those of you that are sons of light, You are the sons of the day. And he is associating that with these people who have found Christ in their lives, whatever that means in this day at Thessalonica. Whatever it meant for those people to understand Jesus, Paul said to them, you're now walking in the light. You are now sons of light. You're different than those who choose darkness rather than light. Now, what are some things that we should surmise about that? I believe that living in the light means that I am a living reflection of the light. Jesus said, I am the light. Remember when John the Baptist came on the scene? Do you remember some of those early gospel writers about John the Baptist? And John made the point saying, I'm not him. I'm not the light. There's one coming. I'm not even worthy to bow down and undo his sandals. But one is coming, and he will be the true light. He will be the light of the world. So when I begin to talk about what does it mean to be sons of light, it means that I am a reflector of the true light. I am reflecting the one who says, I am the light of the world. What should my light be? When people see me, they should see a reflection of the Christ. They should see his brightness shining in me. It's not that they see me. Several years ago, my cousin Scott, he was just a little guy, and we had made arrangements at Christmas time to buy him a swing set. And they had this wonderful idea of putting the swing set inside the house on Christmas Eve. I hear some daddies already going, yeah, that was dumb. It was. It was the dumbest thing we ever did in our lives. We tried to put a swing set up, and of course, those of us who were teenagers at that time didn't really need instructions. I mean, I had seen a swing set. I had played on a swing set. I knew what swing sets looked like, and surely I could put together a swing set. Well, about 3 or 4 in the morning, we were digging, trying to find those directions on how does a swing set go together. But we finally put it together, and Scott came out, and we all thought that he would be ecstatic about the swing set. I mean, there it was. It was in the living room, right by the Christmas tree. Couldn't miss it. I would have thought that would have been, he would have jumped on it, and we would have had to swing him on the swings and all that. No. Do you know what he went after? A flashlight in his stocking. $1.99 cheap flashlight. And man, he ran to the stocking, pulled out that flashlight, and I mean, you would have thought that it was made out of pure gold. And we kept saying, well, Scott, do you see anything else? He just wanted the flashlight. And I loved how he used the flashlight. He would point it around. He would show things. He would point it on things on the floor. Never once did he point to the swing set. All of these other little toys and all of that. And so I said, Scott, let's go into a dark room and see how that flashlight really works. And we went into one of the back bedrooms where it was still dark, shut the door, and he was shining the way for me. And as long as he was shining the way for me, I could see where I was going. But it wasn't too long, the light disappeared. And my assumption was he had turned off the flashlight. But that's not what happened. When I turned around to look, he was holding the flashlight in his eyes like this. And I mean, you could see his face, you could see his pupils, I think you could see his brain. It was just, he had that flashlight right here, and he was bumping into things. Boom, boom. But he was blinding himself because the flashlight was in his own eyes. When we start talking about being a reflection of Christ, it doesn't mean that we show off by pointing the light on us. It doesn't mean that we say to the world, look how holy I am. Look how bright I am. Look how I'm walking in the light, and all of you losers are walking in the dark out there. Look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me. If the light in your life is all about look at me, you've missed the point. The light must become a reflection of His light, and it should be a beacon of hope. When people see us, they should see something of hope. Because Jesus came into the world not to judge the world, not to condemn the world, but to give the world a sense of hope. Those of you that are living in darkness, I am shining a light. And that light is a reflective of hope. When you and I go into dark places, we don't go into dark places shining the light on ourselves saying, look at us, look at us, look at us. We go into dark places reflecting the light of Christ, saying that those of you who are living in darkness, there's hope. There is something that is meaningful and true and good for you. Being a child of the light is not about being in the light. It's about reflecting and giving people hope. When you and I are constantly turning the lights in the darkness off, when you and I are consistently going into dark places and saying, I'm not going to shine here because I don't want anybody to see that I'm associating with these kinds of people, we're losing the very idea of what it means to be the light of the world. Where did Jesus go? He went to dark places. Did he not? Didn't Jesus deal with some really dark people? It's hard for us to believe that, isn't it? That Jesus, when he interacted with people, he was interacting with people that had stories. He was interacting with people that had histories. He was interacting with people who preferred the darkness to the light. And he shines light in their lives, giving them hope. Some of my favorites, the blind man sitting on the side of the road, a beggar who lived his whole life in darkness. I love this story. His name's Bartimaeus. And as Jesus is coming into town that day, the disciples still didn't understand what walking in the light meant. And blind Bartimaeus is sitting on the side of the road, and he can't see, and he knows that something special is going on. And somebody had told him about Jesus was coming by. And he cries out, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And you know what the disciples did? Shh. Don't disturb him. Don't you know he's the light of the world? Do you see how they're missing it? They're turning the lights off on a blind man. Shh, don't make any noise. Don't disturb him. He's too important. He's the light of the world. Well, that's why he came. And what did Jesus do? He gave sight to blind Bartimaeus. He turned the lights on. He didn't turn the lights off. When you and I reflect that, we need to reflect that when we're dealing with people that are in the darkness, we're not turning the lights off. We're trying to turn the lights on. We're not trying to condemn and to judge and to destroy. Even Jesus, you read it yourself. Don't you remember that passage, John 3:16? Don't you love it? For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. I believe that I could go around the room and just point to people, and every one of you could stand up and quote that. But what does verse 17 say? I did not come into the world to judge the world, but that the world might be saved. Why? Because men love darkness rather than light. I didn't come into the world to bring darkness. I didn't come into the world to judge. I didn't come into the world to condemn. I came into the world to turn the lights on. I came into the world to interact with those people who were living in darkness. Let's face it, folks, on the day that Jesus came, everybody was living in darkness. Nobody had arrived. Nobody had been turned on. Nobody understood it. He was the first to bring the light into the world. And there, one by one, each individual living in darkness would have the lights turned on, and they begin to reflect that. You and I cannot walk in the light. We can't be children of light and turn the lights off. We've got to be about turning the lights of hope on. We also need to understand that we reflect grace and love, not hatred and judgment. Somewhere down the line, we have lost what it means to be children of light. We seem to think that that means we are privileged and that we have the right to judge other people or to condemn other people or to put wrath on other people. I don't find that, folks. I find Jesus who says, I am full of grace and love, even for the worst. Wow, that's difficult for us because we don't like that. We were talking in Sunday school this morning about what's going on in Israel right now, And there's a very distinct line of people that are making statements right now. One of them says this: the Gaza Strip is full of poverty-stricken people, and Israel going in there is going to do more damage and more hurt. Another says they were unprovokedly attacked, and they're just protecting their own borders. And they're trying to decide which is right, which is wrong. We always err on the side of grace and love. Always. If we as Christians are trying to decide whether it should be an act of wrath or should it be an act of love, we should always err on the side of love. If it is an act of judgment or condemnation or an act of grace and mercy and forgiveness, we should always err on the side of grace and forgiveness and mercy. And when we're pressed with those very difficult decisions, we have to make sure that we are reflecting the light of Christ and not our own opinion on issues that face us. Walking in the light also means walking in obedience. Walking in the light doesn't mean that I get to walk and be whatever I want to be. There are some things that I am obedient to. I am obedient not because I'm trying to earn God's grace. I'm obedient because I have earned God's grace, and I am appreciative of that. And I'm doing the very best that I can to live in such a way that I can best reflect what Christ has done in my life and what Christ can do in the lives of others. Do you understand what that means? I am obedient today to Christ. I am not obedient to the standards that someone else has set, to world standards. I try to be very, very obedient to what the Bible teaches me and what Jesus teaches me and the words that Jesus said. Jesus said, I didn't say it, Jesus said it, you're to love one another even as I have loved you. This is my what? This is my command. This is what I expect of you. I expect you to love one another. Not only that, but I expect you to love your enemies. I expect you to love those who hurt you. I expect you to love those who persecute you. And Jesus is very defined at that point when he says, if you're going to reflect my light, you got to be obedient. Why? Because I'm obedient to the Father. The very fact that I'm obedient to the Father says that you are to be obedient to me. Paul said it this way: have this mind in you that was also in Christ Jesus, that although he could have claimed equality with God, did not, but took off his robe of glory and laid it to the side and became a man. Not just a man, but a slave. Not just a slave, but the lowliest of slaves, a bondslave. And became what? Obedient even unto death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God highly exalted him. On the day that Jesus died, he said, into your hands I commend my spirit. I've been as obedient as I know to be. But once I breathe my last, it's all up to you. It's yours now. You've asked me to die here. I am doing what you've asked me to do. I have become obedient to this point in my life. But I can't take this any further. Into your hands I commend my spirit. And what did God do? He therefore highly exalted him. On the third day, when everyone thought it was over, God said, my child, come out of the darkness. Come back into the light. Wow. That gives shivers up my spine. That makes me understand that when God expected obedience from his own son to die on a cross, that the things that God, through Christ, expects me to be obedient to are not impossible tasks. Walking in the light also means to a certain degree that you have to walk with a certain sense of integrity because you're transparent. You know, one of the worst things that's happening in our world today is Christians who are not living with integrity. That those who claim to be walking in the light and claim to be obedient to the Father, claim to be reflecting grace and love, and they're a beacon of hope, and the integrity issue is still gnawing away at their foundations. And the last thing I want to say about walking in the light is I think that our life should have some sense of purpose and significance. I shared a little bit Wednesday night about my calling to ministry. And I want you to understand today, I know that this is Pastor Appreciation Day, but I want you to understand something about your pastor. Your pastor didn't take this job because it was a good job. Your pastor didn't go into the ministry because it looked like a glorious thing to do. I did everything I could to keep from going into the ministry. I had it all planned out. I had everything lined up. I knew exactly what my future was going to be, but I went to bed one night, and in the middle of that night, God changed my direction. He gave my life a sense of purpose and significance that I had never considered for myself. A man named Delbert Payne, who was a chaplain at Fort Knox, was preaching a revival at my church. He was my hero because he had a uniform, and I was in ROTC, and I became the #1 cadet in the city of Detroit, and at the end of all that had received a West Point appointment by George Romney. Mitt Romney's daddy was governor of Michigan at that time. But I turned it down because God had changed my purpose. God had changed my significance. I was pretty significant in ROTC. I was seen in ROTC. When I came into the room, people stood to attention. People listened when I spoke. There was something about the being the ranking officer that had all kinds of frills and bells and whistles. My uniform had medals on it that I had earned and had gained my sense of significance because I could tell what these were. The proudest one was a silver musket that made me the #1 marksman in the city of Detroit. I had a significance about me. I had a purpose about me. But I went to bed that night and God said, but that's not your future. Your future is going to be something else. And I told God 3 reasons why he had made a big mistake. 1, I was too young. I was 14 years old. 2, I couldn't speak well in front of people. And 3, he just had made a mistake. I wasn't his guy. Delbert Payne that night, it's the only night during the revival that Delbert Payne wore his uniform. A captain in the United States Army. Shining like a new button. I mean, shoes were polished. All the things that were significant to me were standing in front of me. And he went to 1 Samuel chapter 3, and he preached about God calling Samuel. And he made these 3 points in his sermon. God called Samuel at an early age to prepare him for what he was going to be later on. God called Samuel and promised that he would speak through him and that his speaking skills were not necessary, that God would provide the speech. And then the third one is God doesn't make mistakes when he calls. It was that night that my whole life took a different direction. It was then that I took purpose and significance of something that I thought was purposeful and significant for my life and began to understand that my purpose and significance would be in an entirely different vein. I pastored my first church in 1980. I wasn't even old enough to drive the church van. I had to get special permission from the insurance company to drive the church van because I was 24 years old, had to be 25. But in that first year of ministry, God told me what my significance and purpose would be beyond that. Had 4 teenage children all die violent deaths in 4 separate months, back to back, at Revlon Baptist Church. The first was a little girl named Lori. Her cousin went under a bed and found a pistol, pulled it out, pointed it at her, and shot her. I lived around the corner. I was the first person that they called. I was at the house. I was holding Lori in my arms when the EMS unit came, doing the very best I could to stop the bleeding and realizing that I was doing absolutely nothing, and found myself cussing at God, why don't you do something? The next month, I was teaching a class at Willington Academy. I was teaching ethics at a high school class, and I got a phone call. Brian, one of my basketball players, had an argument with his dad. Instead of trying to resolve that argument, he took a rifle, put a blanket over his head, and shot himself. And I was one of the first people to the house, trying to explain to some grandparents and parents about a God who loved them, even in the midst of this darkest moment. Billy was our misfit. Billy wore a rope around his waist to hold up his pants because he couldn't afford a belt. Billy had a hat that came down, his ears stuck out like this, and Billy was a pest. Billy was just one of those kids that was constantly wanting to be in the center of attention. And I've told you this, I remember the day well. It's as clear in my mind today as if it happened yesterday. When I looked down the hallway at church and I saw Billy coming, and I ducked into the ladies' restroom so I wouldn't have to mess with him. Knowing Billy, he would have followed, but he didn't. But that rings clear in my mind, because not too many weeks thereafter, Billy wanted to prove how important he was and let somebody fire a shotgun over his head. Took a full load in the forehead, and I was at the emergency room when the doctor said, there's nothing we can do. In the 4th month, which would have been January, Chad, who was the older brother of the 10-year-old girl that started this story, took the extension cord off the Christmas tree and hung himself from his bunk bed in his house. And I did that 4th funeral. My point is, you got to give thanks in the darkness. If you're going to walk in the light, doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to touch the darkness. And I can remember well standing in the pulpit at Revelon Baptist Church with that casket, going to the graveside and doing all of the things that I do as a pastor, then going back to my office, taking my ordination certificate off the wall from the Fort Johnson Baptist Church, and I came so very close to ripping it up, putting it in an envelope with a note that said, this is not what I bargained for. I don't want this. And there, as clear as day, as God gives us purpose and direction, God said to me, Steve, you're going to be dealing with misfit kids all your life. Your purpose in life, your significance in life are those kids that are going to come your way at mission projects. I didn't know anything about a mission project, but at mission projects, I find all these misfit kids, and they become my buddies. Every church that I've pastored has misfit kids. Here, that would be Mahari. No. I've always had those kids that needed someone to give them a little extra attention. Do you know what I'm talking about? My life has purpose. My life has significance. It does not mean walking in the light that you don't have to walk a few steps in the darkness. Because every now and then you've got to go where hurting people are. And every now and then you've got to deal with that family and try to explain why they've just lost a child. Or you had to explain to a church why 4, all under the age of 18, had died in a 4-month period of time. And you had to be able to explain that God loves you and that God's grace is significant and that God is still not condemning us. Or say to a whole community that gathered into that church that day, 400 plus, who we had a gun seminar on how to make your home safer. and how to tell our story and how to come alongside other people who are hurting. Do you understand what I'm saying? Walking in the light also should reflect a little bit of our purpose and our significance that's been given to us by God. Not all of you are going to be me. And you're all saying, thank God. And I'm never going to be you. And I say, thank God. But each of us has to find what it means to be a children of light for us. What is it that God's given to us to reflect? What is it that God has given to us to be our specialty or our ministry or what we do and why we do it best? Because being children of light does not mean that we don't always avoid the darkness. It means we sometimes have to go there. And then the last thing I want to say is that walking in the light is always maintaining God's will for our life. Verse 9, for God has not destined us for wrath, but for obtaining salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ, who died for us, so that whether we are awake or asleep, we will live together with him. Therefore, encourage one another and build up one another, just as you also are doing. Folks, I am so proud of North River Baptist Church. It's the best church I've ever pastored. Greatest bunch of people I've ever had the privilege to be a part of. I love you from the depths of my heart. And I want us to understand that we encourage one another and that we build up one another, and that's maintaining God's will. That there are so many other things that we often deflect off and say, this is what being a church is. And sometimes those things are not walking in the light at all. And sometimes the greatest lights in church are not found in the big church. Sometimes not found in the most popular church. Sometimes not found in the most prosperous church. But sometimes God's light is found in very small places where hearts are maintaining God's will for their lives. And they're being what God called them to be. And they're doing it day in and day out. And the light still shines. Thank you, North River, for being a light. I would say to you that in one of the darkest moments of my life, North River Baptist Church became a light to us. At a time when we were uncertain about our tomorrows and our futures, and I had a girl in college and I had two in high school, and moving to Roswell was a difficult thing to do for them. But you know what? If you talk to all of them today, they'll say, man, what a great move it was. And they'll talk to you about what God has done and how God has ministered and how God has prospered their lives. I want you to understand on this day particularly how appreciative your pastor is of you. Because you ministered to me in a time when I needed you. You became light to me in a very dark moment of my life. In a moment when I thought God was through and that I was going to go on and do something else, was really considering car salesman. I thought that would have been a good job for me. It was then that North River said, no, I met some really cool people. I met a man named Kevin Hampton, Joyce Duru. And you guys did it right. I have to be the first to tell you this. You did it right. Because you didn't tell me the chairman of your search committee was Dan Luter until after the fact. You guys kept him hidden. I mean, I never talked to him.